Okay, we are live. Tom Cowan, welcome back to the Terrain Theory Podcast.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you again.
It's great to see you as well. Tom, why a new biology? What's wrong with the old one?
It's all wrong.
All of it.
It's like I once said that everything that Anderson Cooper says in his new show is a lie. And then somebody showed me a clip and he said, today is June 3rd, 19 something or 20 something. And I looked on the calendar and sure enough, it was. And so I had to take that back because that was actually true. But not much more than that.
And even that we have to question.
I would say that there's like maybe a few things in the old biology that are correct. So to say it's all incorrect would be misleading and inaccurate, but pretty much most of it.
Let's start at the most obvious ones for you anyway. As you started to dig into it, what was so apparently wrong that needed reconsidering?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing is, so I'm, like my training, right? So I have a BS, which is a good name for it, in zoology. So that's the study of animals, I think. And then I went to medical school, and then I did a residency or internship. So I would say that I'm fairly well versed in what normal science and medicine thinks about the world and how they see the world. Right? You could decide for yourself, but I'd say that's a reasonable training. Not once in that time did I ever hear anybody describe the difference between a living thing and a dead thing. They even interestingly, and I worked as an ER doctor for a while, nobody actually told me, how do you know if somebody's dead or not? I mean, you sort of figure it out after a while, and you just kind of guess. But so to me, that's a problem. Because if you don't know what the difference between a living thing and a dead thing, and I will admit it's complicated, and I'm not sure I could actually prove what the difference is. But the fact that nobody even said anything about that is a huge problem. The second problem is they somehow in the evolution of what's generally called science, they forgot to factor in the idea that how you find something has an impact on what you find. And that's a huge problem. And so if you look at, I like to start with very basic things so people can understand. I mean, if I said, how do you know that there's such a thing as a frog, and what a frog is made of, and what a frog does? And so that would be a scientific quest. And it's pretty simple. You would make a definition of what you think a frog is. I mean, there's a couple of ways of doing it. One is you can just go to a place where you think is the natural habitat of a frog, and then you see what you see. And you see these things that, look about this big, and they, have legs and brown and all that. And you say, that's a specific organism. Let's call it a frog. And then you do something that I would say is a really important part of the process, which is you isolate the frog. In other words, you don't study the entire pond if you want to know what a frog does. You do take into account the frog is in the pond and how that interaction works. But if you're going to say, well, this thing is part of a frog, like skin, you wouldn't just analyze a sample of pond water, right? Because
Hmm.
that's not just a frog. So you would isolate the frog, have a pure frog, and then you could either watch it and see what it does, or you could analyze it. If you're a mean person, you could even kill the frog and see what it's made of and what the parts are and figure out how the parts are put together. But then if you kill it, you have to account for the fact that it's now different. And it might look different. It might have even different chemicals. It might have different properties. And I'm not saying necessarily it does, but you have to be aware that that's a possibility. And that that process goes for everything. If you wanted to know whether there's a hammer, right? You go to your toolbox, you open open it up, you see what's inside, you say, that's what I call a hammer. And then if you want to find out what it's made of and what it does, you don't take the whole toolbox and bang a nail, and because then you don't know what part of it actually banged in the nail. You isolate the hammer, then you can find out what it's made of, and then you can see what it does. So it hits the nail and the nail goes in. And then you try, another part of science is to try to prove yourself wrong. So how do you know it's not just the act of going like this that makes the nail go in? Right? I mean, that sounds stupid, but so you do it. Go like that, nail doesn't go in. If you do it with the hammer, it does. You try to think, what about if I'm thinking the nail will go in? So you think the nail goes in without the hammer, it doesn't go in. So at the end of that day, you have, defined the scientific process, the dependent variable, the effect you're looking for, and the independent variable, which is one thing, and you've tested it, tried to prove yourself wrong, and then you can end up with an idea about how things work. So that, unfortunately, I guess you could say that word, is not how we do science. We start with an idea that this must be true, and then we go looking for evidence. And then if we find things that are contradictory, we put those people who say that in jail or censor them. And then we make a whole imaginary world out of our assumptions that in the first place have never been proven. So you can give, hundreds of examples of that, and I've given a lot of them around the virus. Nobody has ever, nobody, of all the things that you study, you always first isolate, purify them, and then study them, except a virus. Why not? Well, they can't do it, they say. So that brings up the question of, can you know that something is a part of something without having the something first? And I would say the answer is no.
Hmm.
And so then they go into a whole long song and dance using indirect evidence that none of it is actually valid, and they don't even have the particle in the first place. And you can do that with ribosomes and even cells, and with synapses, and DNA is hereditary material. All of these are theories, or they're not even really theories, they're hypotheses, which largely have been disproven. And I go into some detail about that. So at the end of the day, then, that's the old biology that is attempting to describe how things work, but none of the, few, if any, of the premises, the assumptions are actually true. So you say first, like for instance, you give somebody's depressed because they have low serotonin at their synapse. So first of all, that assumes there's a synapse in a nerve, which is a junction. Yet you'll never find a picture of a synapse. And in fact, the whole idea of a synapse, which is a gap in a nerve, and they say it takes 0.05 seconds for the chemical, the serotonin, to traverse the synapse. Now, here's what's interesting, which is sort of a dead giveaway that there's something wrong. If you say, how many synapses are there between your brain and your finger? Right? You think, move your finger, then it goes down the nerves, and then it fires your finger. How many nerve synapse? Do you know how many there are?
Millions?
Okay, that's an idea. I mean, so there's a certain length of a nerve and then a synapse and then another length. So I spent probably 3 to 5 hours looking on the internet for anybody who could tell me how many synapses there are, and nobody knew.
So it's never been calculated.
Never been calculated.
Okay, continue.
So they don't know.
They don't know.
So that's interesting. Why didn't somebody, So I took a guess, because they say the nerves are like, half a meter long or a foot or 6 inches.
Okay, I was.
So that's like 25 synapses.
Okay.
And each one is 0.05 seconds to cross the synapse. So if there's 25, that's a second and a half to go from your brain to your finger. And that's just the synapse, not the nerve part, which is 100 times as long.
Mm-hmm.
So then I ask people, okay, stick your finger out, and I'm going to say, move your finger. So go. 1,001, if that's the case, you have a problem.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's at least 3 seconds, 1.5 to cross the synapse, another 1 to go down the nerve. So move your finger, go. 1,001, 1,002, 1,003, move.
Right.
Like, that's not how it works. It's instantaneous, which already means there can't be synapses.
Mm-hmm.
There can't be breaks in the impulse.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can dissect a nerve. And so here now we get into how do you find it?
Mm-hmm.
You dissect a nerve, look under a microscope. There is not one picture of a synapse in all the medical literature. So why not? Well, they say it's too small, which is interesting because they can see the nerve easily, and you should be able to see the break easily on a normal light microscope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's too small. So then you have to use an electron microscope. So now we're talking about, taking the nerve and grinding it up and freezing it 120 degrees below zero, staining it, dehydrating it, putting it in resin, shooting a beam at it, and you've totally dehydrated, so it's now a powder. And then they show you the synapse. And you say, so if you have a long tube of water with like an electric wire with an insulation around it, and you dehydrate it, it might break. Right? That's what I mean by, if you do that process to that nerve, it's likely going to break, just like you would expect. And then you say, look, there's a gap. Well, how did you get the gap? Well, because you friggin' broke it. And then you do an electron microscope and you see it coiled up on either side. And you see it stain heavily at the ends. So that's where the serotonin is, they say.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no evidence that it was there or even present in the nerve in an unfixed preparation. And then they use antibodies, which they say are specific to serotonin. But even though the editor of physical chemistry said there are no specific antibodies. So that's a lie. So anyways, so why does this matter? Because if you go to your normal doctor or normal alternative doctor or normal holistic doctor, he or she thinks if you have a neurological problem, you have a problem with your synapses in your neurotransmitters.
Mm-hmm.
And I would contend that everything that they do after that is nonsense. Because the whole premise of how they understand a nerve or depression or neurological diseases is fundamentally inaccurate. So I said, well, it doesn't work like that. How does it work? It's it's more tricky, in a sense, complicated to say this is the way it works. I know there's no synapses. I know the nerve is a continuous, highly organized, coherent water surrounded by insulation. And so if you increase the coherence of the water, for instance, by exposure to, infrared light or by standing on the earth, you increase the flow in the nerves and your nerves will function better. And that's based on an accurate biology. So if you go to our clinic, we tell you to stand on the ground and be in the earth and structure your water. And by the way, I just doing that, and there's some other things. Like I was just talking to the main practitioner, and we've had now 3 people with glioblastomas, which are nerve tumors, who are on seizure medicine, having 7 to 10 seizures a day. And all we did was apply these principles, and now none of them are on seizure medicine, and none of them are having seizures, which is a neurological, we think, problem, because their nerves function better. Why do it function better? Because there is actually a way that nerves function, and it's not the way they teach you in medical school or in the old biology textbooks. That's just make believe. They came up with a hypothesis which you can disprove, and therefore everything that follows from that will be incorrect.
What was the process used to arrive at the understanding you have for what a nerve is?
I mostly tried to figure out what it isn't.
Elimination.
It's Sherlock Holmes,
Mm-hmm.
Who I, by the way, read the complete works of Sherlock Holmes when I went to medical school, because he said, just go and figure out what's not true, and what you're left with, no matter how implausible, will be the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I've been doing. The heart isn't a pump. There's no germs, don't cause disease. Cancer is not a genetic disease. It's not even a disease. And it doesn't matter in the beginning what's true. That I discovered was a trap. Try to find out what's true. That you can't do that. So you just sort of use the word debunk, what's not true, which is usually pretty easy. And then what you're left with must be accurate.
Is there any truth to the idea that we simply lack the instruments needed to arrive at an understanding of some of the functions of the human body or biology?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we don't know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that's probably unknowable. I mean, fair enough. But there's enough stuff, and there's an accurate enough model that for all practical purposes, we could create a really whole and healthy and fun life, and people wouldn't have to get sick, and we wouldn't have to worry about what we don't know
Mhm.
because we know enough. And you don't need, just like the most important things that you learn about a frog is by watching a live frog in its environment. All the anatomy stuff and killing the frog, I would say almost never. It certainly doesn't do that frog any good, and I don't think it does frogs in general. It's like Jonas Salk, right? He killed 15,000 monkeys to develop a quote vaccine that then went on to harm and kill millions and millions of children.
Yeah.
So that's what happens when you decide to abuse and torture animals and other living things. You end up with nothing useful and just a bunch of sadism. That's what medical research is. It's either sadistic or technology. It's not biology.
Mm. It certainly does feel that way.
And I tell you, if I was the boss, I would say anybody doing medical research wanting money, a uh, they they would have to show me that what they're doing improves the life of that living being and the habitat of that group. Like if you're going to do ferrets, that ferret has to have a better life, and ferrets in general have to have, like a better ferret habitat or whatever, whatever ferrets need. If you can't show me that, you're not doing the study. Because all of the important things about how organisms function, that's how you learn them, by observing, interacting with them, actually getting to know them and getting to understand and having an actual living connection with them. That's the study of biology. What we do is not. It's sadistic technology.
It's the study of death rather than the study of life, isn't it?
Yes.
Tom, since you've mentioned the new biology clinic, which is something relatively new, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what a patient can expect. A new patient who is arriving at the new biology clinic, what does that process look like? What does that experience look like?
So the other, it's not a revelation per se, but insight, or I don't know what it is actually, that I came to was not only like, do all these physical structures like synapses and ribosomes and endoplasmic reticulum, they don't exist. But neither do diseases, at least as we conceive of them. And, it's the way that I mean that is, we talk about like an infection. So you put a splinter in your finger and you don't take it out and you get pus. Is that an infection? I mean, to me, that's your body trying to push out, using the mechanisms at its disposal, something it doesn't want. Same with the lungs, right? You put crap in your lungs, you cough it out. Is the cough, is that bronchitis? Is that a disease? Or is that because you've exposed yourself to something and then your body's trying to get rid of it? And then you get even more sophisticated, because I've come to understand, and I know this is a long-winded answer, but so let's take an example like cancer. Like surely that's a disease. So what do we say about cancer? Cancer is cells that grow too fast and are disorganized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Agree? That's
Mm-hmm.
what we call cancer. So here's the interesting thing about that. So when you look at tissue like a liver, spleen, whatever, you don't really see cells except at the periphery. Now, then we're told that all the cells, like in humans, have two sets of 23 chromosomes, 22 somatic and X and X, X and Y. And in order to divide, they have to pair up, and then they attach to a spindle, and then they get pulled apart, and then a cell wall goes in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's basic biology. So that's a normal cell called mitosis, and with germ cells, they don't double. So that's meiosis. So with a cancer cell, all cancer cells have a disordered and disorganized and abnormal number of chromosomes. That's how a pathologist diagnoses a cancer cell. So they see these cells at the periphery of the organ or in the tumor. They take them out. Oh, this one's got 84 pieces of broken chromosomes. That's a really bad cancer. This one's got 16, they're all fused together. So here's something I never thought about. If you have 84 pieces of broken, disorganized chromosome, how does that hook up to the spindle, separate, and then divide?
Right. The very process of division should not work, right? According to the theory. Yeah.
It won't work because there's no chromosomes to separate. So what that tells you is cancer cells aren't dividing.
Mm.
They are the excretion products of the tissue. In other words, you have this liver, homogeneous tissue, and just in the normal course of events, some of it dies, it's got waste products, so it packages them up at the periphery, gets rid of them, and those are called liver cells. If you put more poison in there, you get more liver cells created. That's the tumor.
Mm-hmm.
If you put nasty poison, you get more cells created, which are all messed up. All the chromosomes. By the way, you don't see chromosomes in the normal tissue. That's an interesting thing itself. So where'd they go?
Mm-hmm.
They say they unfolded and became DNA. Except the DNA is too long to fit in the chromosome. So how does that work? Anyways, so it doesn't work. But so, in other words, this process of cancer is the poison the liver. It starts increasing the production of cells, right? And they're nasty because they're all full of poison. They got broken chromosomes, etc. They're not dividing and spreading through the blood from the breast to the brain. And here's another thing. That's what they say, right? Goes from your breast. You got to catch it early, get rid of it.
Metastasizing.
So you go to your oncologist, say, show me, so they're sort of walking through the blood. Okay, let's just look in the blood and see the cancer cells. Oh, you can't, they're not there. Why not? Well, because they're either in the breast or they're in the liver. Well, how did they get from the breast to the liver? Through the blood. Well, okay, show me the blood. Now let me see. Nope, can't see them. How come? Well, because you can't. Okay, so if you go to a normal doctor, that's what he's thinking. Cut off these. This is your body's way of getting rid of stuff. What we do is, because we don't believe this is a disease, this is a story that you have got yourself into. Why? Because one person, eats glyphosate all day long, like they think that's good. Another person, because they inject themselves with poisons, otherwise called vaccines, because they think that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Another person, you could make up a lot of reasons. And they all have a different story. They all have a different reason for making this. And so our first step always is, what's your story? Well, I go out and I suck on polluted air as much as possible. What's your problem? I don't know, doc. I keep getting bronchitis. I went to the doctor and he gave me antibiotics 6 times a year, and now I can't hardly breathe. Why not? Well, I don't know. Well, what do you do all day? Well, I suck on polluted air because I think that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe you should not do that. And then we'll help you clean out your lungs because your body's already doing that. We don't have to like do that. We may help like with herbs or turpentine, breathe in stuff that helps you get the mucus out, right? That's just like if you've got something in your finger, you might want to get a tweezers and pull it out. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's how we do medicine. What happened to you? And, my 35 years of doing that's all I did. Person come in, hi, what's up? I have, my foot hurts. What happened? Well, every morning I wake up, my wife stomps on my foot. They don't have bursitis. They have foot stomping by wife disease.
Mm-hmm.
So because I'm a brilliant guy, say, you might want to find out why your wife stomps on your foot and figure out another way, like stomp on a balloon or something. Because no, she has to stomp on something. Otherwise, she doesn't feel right. Okay, get her a squishy pad, stomp on that, call me in a week, tell me hey, my foot's all better. It's great. I don't know whether it's, bursitis or arthritis, all that, it is irrelevant. Everybody has a story. The story's always different. And there's a very clear technique of finding the story. I stole it from Carl Rogers, who said, you start wherever the person starts and you ask them every question you can think of except why. Like, so because if you say, my foot hurts, first question, why does your foot hurt? Well, because I went to the doctor, he did an x-ray, said I have arthritis.
Yeah, they're going to perpetuate the story that they've been told.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. They and it's always, based on a specific diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard so many of that, what's the trouble? I have fibromyalgia. What does that feel like? Well, when you have fibromyalgia, you have pain all over. I said, everywhere? Yes, everywhere. Like your teeth? No.
Yeah.
So when do you have pain? When you have fibromyalgia, you have pain mostly at night. And I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, I don't have pain at night. Why did you say when you have pain? And so I said, no, I'm wondering what you feel. And then they get mad at you and say, I thought you knew about fibromyalgia. Right. And then you realize that the problem is not fibromyalgia, but something happened to this person to convince them that they should feel nothing. Like somebody abused them or something.
Mm.
And so they were attempting to live a life of feeling nothing, which is better than feeling pain.
Mm-hmm.
And their body said the opposite. It's better to feel pain than feel nothing. Feel nothing, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Feel pain, at least you could do something about it. At least you're real. So their body creates this painful sensation. And then my job was to shift them from exaggerating and lying, like it hurts all the time. Yeah? When you're sleeping? Well, no. So why did you say it hurts all the time? Because it actually hurts from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. when my husband is hitting me with the balloon.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only time it hurts. That's the reality. And now you know what you can do about it. And obviously, sometimes it's complicated and there's layers upon layers of what happened in the story. And how you arrived at this. But the amazing thing about people is they know where to start, but they only will tell you where to start if you ask them properly
Mm-hmm.
and you show that you care what they say. I remember, when I was in ER, I read a thing saying you go to a normal doctor, and I haven't been to a normal doctor in 40 years, so I don't know if this is true anymore. They say the average time they give you to tell your story before they interrupt and tell you what they're going to do or the diagnose, 37 seconds.
Hmm.
Now, I can tell you when I was an ER doctor, I got that down to about 20 seconds because I was not interested. You come in, my arm hurts, I'm good. I don't care what happened to you. I'm doing an x-ray and I'm basing what I do on the x-ray.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to hear that you fell off a horse or you twisted it backwards or you got stung by a bee. I don't need to know that. I'm not interested. And you end up seeing the world through the x-ray is the only thing that matters. That's how you're taught. And if you do an x-ray, you're good. All I need to know is which arm. Anything else, not interested.
I see that process also in alternative medicine. Unfortunately, folks who are, say, naturopaths, still relying on blood work and your lab results, and these numbers really just reducing you down to a set of numbers and then proceeding forward from there. So it's not like just because someone's an alternative
No.
medical practitioner, they're going to have adopt this same approach, valuing the story above all else first.
No. In fact, the functional doctors, or as I like to call them, dysfunctional doctors, are often the worst because they've bought into this way of thinking. Even worse, at least normal doctors are skeptical of saying your problem is your methmalolic acid levels, and there's so many layers of how you get a elevated or a suppressed malonic acid number on one test on one day
Right.
of 1 week. And then they do all kinds of measurements of how sympathetic tone. By the way, come into the doctor, pay a lot of money, put you in a thing, let's test your fear levels. And these often are so uncontrolled, and there's no standards, and they usually respond by saying, yeah, but it's the computer that tells you, so it's objective, as if nobody programmed the computer to say that this measurement of this amount of acid on your skin or this voltage on your skin doesn't mean you should take some medicine.
Yeah.
Like somebody put that into the computer. And the other thing is the best analysis is a human being. And so you have to train yourself to look and listen and ask questions properly. And I can tell you, of all the things I did in 35 years, and I've done diets and IV this, and by far the best was listening to people's story, having them tell me what happened to them. And then they came to the understanding of what happened, and then they changed, and it was the best thing I ever did. And I did it with every single person.
It sounds a lot like talk therapy, Tom.
I wasn't I wasn't doing any therapy.
Just listening and asking
I was
questions.
listening and asking them the questions so that they would say, one of my favorite stories, a guy, 20 years old, comes in, I have Guillain-Barré. Went to 6 neurologists, gets a paralysis of his limbs. He comes in with crutches. What happened? I've 6 neurologists. Nobody can figure out what happened. So I said, when did this start? I was 12. The first step then, convince me before you were 12 that you were totally fine. I didn't say it like that. I said, what was your life like? I was captain of the soccer team. I helped my father at his machine shop. I ate normal food. You hear him say he's fine. Okay? No doubt. What happened next? My mother took me to get a flu shot. What happened next? Week later, I can't move my legs. What happened next? I go to a neurologist. He says it has nothing to do with the flu shot, that I had post-viral syndrome, otherwise known as Guillain-Barré. Then steroids, and 6 neurologists, they all said it had nothing to do with the shot. And they tried this and that and finally got sick of it. And he's still mostly paralyzed, but a little better because he changed his diet, etc. So he tells me that story. So then I tell it back to him. Okay. And I'm using his words, right? Because I don't know. I said, you were fine before you were 12. You were captain of the soccer team. And he's agreeing because he said that. And I didn't. Then you got a flu shot. And then you couldn't walk, and it's been like that ever since. Is that right? Then he says to me, like everybody said, you think it had something to do with the flu shot? Now, I didn't tell him it had anything to do with it. I just said what I heard. And then sometimes, if it was certain situations, I'd pull out the package insert of the flu shots. One of the known side effects is Guillain-Barré. And you know what happens next? 100% of the time. Guy says, I knew it was that flu shot. Yeah. And you know what happens next? He either laughs or cries.
Yeah.
Why? Because he knew all these 7 years. And he had been told, his parents were told, and then he starts crying. Mm-hmm. And interesting, when he's done crying and I'm just sitting there listening, you know what they do then? Because when people say, do you have a compliance problem with people doing what I tell them to do? Which I always think, I never do what anybody tells me to do. So I don't know why anybody does so I don't have a compliance. But he looks at me and he says, you have to tell me how to recover from that flu shot or I'm going somewhere else.
Oh, wow.
Right? Perfectly reasonable thing to say. Like, now I'm pissed. I know what happened. Is there any way to, what's in that thing? Mm-hmm. Aluminum. How do you get rid of aluminum? You take silica or whatever. Okay. How much do I take? Where do I get it from? What if I take this? And then he comes back a week later. I read that if you take this, that might help, or I sit in a hot bath or go to a sauna or whatever. Fine. And, then we do things, and I'm not like, he's an empowered guy now. Mm-hmm. He knows what happened. No doubt. He's not listening to those idiot neurologists anymore because they don't have a clue. And he already knows they can't help him, and they made him worse. And next thing you know, 6 months later, he's totally fine. Mm. And he mostly figured out what he had to do. And I was just, I have a certain experience, like I've seen 10 people with this, so I can say, no, you don't want to do that, like, because that's a wasting your time or something. So I can be a kind of resource only because I've seen 100 people like that.
Sure.
And he's seen one. And so he doesn't. But now that, you go on chat groups or whatever, and you can figure out a lot. And I am 100% all for that. I don't need to tell anybody what the problem. They tell me what the problem is.
But it sounds like what your practice is you're a spell breaker.
I mean, yeah, they're like hexed.
Yeah, exactly. You help them see through the hex and break it. It's funny because a joke that I grew up with, like a dad joke, is "Doctor, doctor, it hurts when I do this," and the doctor says, "Don't do that."
Yeah.
It's basically
Right.
the new biology clinic.
Right. Yeah. Right. I became convinced that the number one thing that helps people is seeing the reality and the truth.
Right.
And it's an interesting thing, my good friend Kelly Brogan, who um, she said something very interesting about this, which I think people should really consider, that the truth is never scary. Now, it can be painful, and you may not want to know that your husband is having an affair, right? But that's the truth. But somehow you know that. And if you think about it, if you keep yourself from knowing that, you end up being in a relationship. I mean, you may not mind that, but if you do mind that, that's actually not meeting your needs. It's not real in that sense. So who would want to do that? And it may be painful, and may have to do stuff to fix the situation, which you may not want to do otherwise, whatever. But ultimately, it leads you to a better place. And I've heard so many times people, the whole medical profession is about this ridiculous notion of not blaming the patient, right? Why did you get cancer? Never mind that you injected poison like 2 months into you before this started. It's genetic. You got bad genes. You didn't have anything to do with it. Just never mind. You got nothing to do with this. And woe unto you as a doctor if you say, I wonder what the guy did.
It's pushing the victim mentality on every patient.
Everybody's a victim.
Yeah.
It's bad genes, bad luck, or we don't know.
So you have no accountability over your actions, and then you have no agency over your healing, right? You just
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No accountability, no agency. All you just take it out. We'll take care of it. And then you say, well, it doesn't work, because they look at the numbers and you don't get any better doing it. No, don't worry about it. And that's where we are as a society, which is no accountability, no agency, just suckers.
And no incentive to look any deeper. Zero
Yeah,
incentive. Right.
right. The incentive is your life.
Yes.
And if that doesn't move you, good luck, because you got a problem.
Tom, you've this is a question that I've been pondering for you in particular, because you have exposed virology, conventional medicine, biology. These foundational sciences have basically unraveled or are unraveling. And where are you finding solid ground? I think about the listener going, wait a minute, everything is up in the air. Everything I thought I knew or believed, Tom is saying, nope, that turns out it's wrong. Like, where does a person find the solid ground? Where do you find solid ground and go, this I know to be true. I'm going to start from here.
I mean, I don't worry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's unsettling to a lot of people, but it somehow comes naturally to me. And I've been doing this for at least 50 years. And I don't feel good. I don't feel comfortable believing something that I don't know is true. It just makes me feel very uneasy.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to, and there's a lot of things I don't know. And I just, figure, mostly figure if, and this is probably arrogant, but if I don't know the answer, I got the wrong question. So I try to examine the situation to see what the better question would be that would lead me to the answer. And you get into this a lot with like the, biology and medicine and virology in particular, because they like to ask you all kinds of questions like, how do you explain the genome or something? And you can get all turned in circles. But if you go to the foundation, which is you can't prove something is a part of something unless you prove that something exists. Then the whole genome thing becomes irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a false question, which has no relevance. So, I mean, if you're asking in a sort of emotional sense, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't bother me. I figure if it's important subject, I'll find out. Somebody will tell me, and I'll come to the right question, and then I'll know. Like I know there's no viruses,
Mm-hmm.
and I always want to know instead of believe, and that's where a lot of people get hung up. Like I'm, doing a workshop thing this weekend, and I'm going to actually ask people, like, how many of you people in the audience? So it's an interact. Would right now get into a televised to the whole world debate about the existence of viruses with Robert Malone and Ryan Cole? I mean, would you two guys do that?
I'm a yes and kind of guy, so I would do it, but I would be very scared. I would probably not do it, Tom. Yeah.
I would do it. I would prepare. I would call you, Tom. We'd talk for a while.
I would have an earbud with a line to you, Tom. No, that is a tall order. I would say very few people would feel comfortable getting into that debate live.
Right. That's the problem. But here's another way to look at this. So I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
Are these dots on a straight line?
No.
How do you know that?
I observe them, and they do not appear to be in a straight line to me.
Or you could get a ruler,
Mm.
right? Like the edge of this is what we call straight.
Yes.
Now, I know that if you take a microscope, you can see little edges. But I go like this, and they're not on a straight line.
Mm-hmm.
Would you debate any mathematician in the world about whether this is straight or not?
I would feel given that tool, I would feel comfortable debating them.
Right. So that's where we need people to be with virology.
Yes.
It's that simple. There is a technique that allows you to measure and see to answer the question. Once you got that, now they will try. Well, but if you look at it like this, it kind of looks straight, and this is like the hypotenuse of the right angle balloon thing, and anyways, if you put it in a computer, you get it twists it and makes it. And how do you explain that, big guy? Right? So I'm not saying you'll ever convince them.
Yes.
But that's because you know how to know what the truth is here.
Yes.
And until you can get there with any of these things, you're at risk of being a sucker.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like being a sucker. I don't know why, but my whole life, there's something about being taken for a sucker. It's what I call the Lucy and Charlie Brown thing, right? This time you can kick the football. And he goes and runs, he pulls it away.
Yeah.
Well, no, this time, vote for me. You can kick the football. Just get this vaccine. Just do this chemotherapy. Just take this antidepressant. This time it'll work. Never works.
I see the gravestone now. Not a sucker.
Well, but then you always get fooled. There's always some angle that somebody knows how to play you for a sucker. Usually your children.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that would be why a person, even in our position, who've talked to folks like you about virology and the pseudoscience of virology, would hesitate to go in a public forum to debate those folks, is because, like as you said, they have ways of trying twisting words, and also it comes back to, if we can't agree upon the definition of, say, isolation, we get nowhere in this debate.
You may get nowhere, but that doesn't matter because you're not
Correct.
trying to. So all you do, you say, show me a study that shows that sick people make well people sick.
Right.
Here's 4 studies that say they don't.
Yep.
Show me a study. Well, we don't have a study. Or they show you a study and it's obviously bullshit. You know, they inject stuff in somebody's brain and they say that's contagion. And all you do then is you don't move off that topic
Sure.
until they agree. And you just say, look, here's studies that you cannot show me one that makes any sense, right?
Mhm.
That's, like a scientific method study that shows this phenomena. Therefore, we don't need to do any more about it because we already know sick people don't make well people sick. Why look for an agent?
Yeah, move on.
Yeah. So, and you, even if it's 20 minutes of, no, we have to move on to sequence. No, I'm not moving on because you're either going to agree that there's no study, there's no evidence that this is true, or show me the study that says it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it may end the conversation right there, which is fine because you're not trying to convince them. You're trying. And here's another thing. Here's my new scheme in life, which is you guys should hear this. I think see, they're not going to talk to me, but some of them may talk to you. So you invite Ryan Cole and Malone and Peter McCullough and say, let's have a conversation. The problem right now is that interviewers and podcasters and, just people, and reporters, they don't know anything about the subject. They don't know how to ask questions and they don't know how to stick in there when it gets uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not moving on until you show me this study. Once you do, then or you agree there is no study, then you go on to show me that a part of a sick person, like a chickenpox vesicle liquid, makes somebody else have chickenpox. Show me that study. They don't have it. Then you go on to isolation and you say, how would you isolate a hammer and a frog and an elephant? And why is it different? And then you go through the study and you get them to either get off the call, which is fine, or admit that they don't have such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's time for, you guys just invite them, get them out. Maybe they'll do it. And outline, and I have a very specific outline now of how you go about doing this.
Mm-hmm. I cannot disagree that it's time for these folks to be put in hot seats, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I tell you, so many times I hear even people who sort of know, and they finally get one of these folks in there and they just cave. And they let them go talking about nonsense for half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't help. It's very specific. Show me the study that shows sick people make well people sick.
I would say another template, or at least an example of perhaps how to do it, is that conversation between Andy and Judy that happened, was it last year?
Yeah.
Yeah. Andy stuck to his guns.
Yeah. And they just go off into just, absolute bullshit.
Yeah, it just become yes, correct. Correct. They don't fall back on any sort of evidence and proof. They just become very animated, or that's one example anyway.
Yeah.
Animated and
And they
adamant.
start talking about things that nobody knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Right. Tom,
we can
we
get
want to be respectful of your time. There's one question I had while we have you. I'd love to get in here. And since everything is in question at this point, I think I can sort of read between the lines and know the answers. But there's all these headlines flying around about mRNA technologies being introduced into the food supply. And so what is up with that? What's going on there?
Well, there's zero evidence that injecting mRNA makes any animal or person make any protein,
Right.
including a spike protein. So they're not injecting you with spike proteins. Spike proteins are just a laboratory concoction that is not part of any virus or part of anything real. And the mRNA sequence, which they claim makes you make spike proteins, doesn't. And the reason I know that, again, it's all about the questions. If you say you get somebody here, who says that, you say, show me a study that injects different quantities of mRNA, right? And gets different amounts of spike protein. Like if you inject a gram, you get 3 grams. If you inject 100 grams, you get 2,000, whatever. Or maybe it's the opposite or something. There's not one study. There's not one study that has measured the amount of spike protein in somebody who's had an mRNA injection. Now, they will attempt to baffle you by saying, no, we did measure it. And then you have to say, how did you measure it? With antibodies. How do you know those antibodies are specific to the spike protein? Did you do a control and inject them with some other poison, and so you get inflammation, and then inject them with the same antibody and see whether that lit up too? No. Why didn't you do that? Well, because we know it's specific to that spike protein. How do you know? Well, because it says it on the package insert. So how did they know? I mean, that's one of the people's argument for how they knew there was SARS-CoV-2, because they bought it from the virus store online. And it said SARS-CoV-2. What did they do to get that? He didn't know. But it was from the store. It's got to be true. Right. So the antibodies are not specific. All they're doing is going to sites of injury. So any poison you put in those shots will create injury at certain sites, which the antibodies will light up. So they have no evidence of that. So it's not like injecting a cow with mRNA will make them make a protein. It won't. That whole thing is just nonsense. That's good news, because they don't know how to hack the code of life. This is the Wizard of Oz stuff. The wizard thinks that, he's got this big, brouhaha of how powerful he is, but it turns out it's just some bald idiot behind the curtain. And they can't make the protein. But what they can do is make the cow sick. So then the real question is, do you want to eat sick chickens? Now, I can tell you my answer is no. Like, I don't think you get healthy by eating sick cows. And it's not because they're making mRNA proteins or sequences or spike this or viral that. It's because you've poisoned them with, hydrogels and lipid nanoparticles and God knows what else. We don't really know what's in there. And so now you have an injured, sick cow with a sick liver with toxic buildup in their tissues. And that's not something that's, again, this is just sadism.
Yeah.
There's nothing in it for the cow or the chicken.
Or the lettuce or the radish or what have you. Right.
Yeah, there's nothing in it for any of those. And I decided, 40 years ago, I'm not going to get healthy by eating sick food. I can't prove that exactly, but it doesn't make any sense to me. I think, you spend a lot of time thinking what should a cow eat and how should they live? Like, should they be cooped up all day, or should they just be hanging out in a field with other cows? And, you know, I mean, it's pretty obvious to me, but not to doctors.
And not to, unfortunately, a vast majority of the population on the planet. Not yet, anyway. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're getting there. Tom, how are you for time?
Yeah, we should wrap it up pretty soon.
Okay. I did have
Mostly get tired of hearing myself talking.
Well, we don't tire of hearing you talk, Tom, but I hear you. I have a question. Of all the discoveries or realizations that you've made regarding how the body works, which has been the most profound?
I mean, again, it's mostly that nothing that I learned is actually real. And so then you find out what is real, which is basically we're organized water with an electromagnetic field that gives us information. And that's all there is. And so it's the different types of information, and it's the different qualities of the structure of the water that determines how things go.
And that sounds like an entirely separate podcast episode, and we don't have the time to get into that. One last question, Tom. My son, 6 years old, wants a cat.
Oh yeah.
Tell us the pros and cons of cat ownership. And does Pumpkin do consultations on raising indoor-outdoor cats?
Yeah. So here's our rule about animals, which I think is really a good rule. It's sort of like what I've been saying all along. The choice of having an animal is, are you equipped, prepared, physically, maybe financially, and emotionally, maybe psychologically, to give that animal the best life you can. So, like, I wouldn't have a cat if I could never let the cat outside, because I just don't think that's fair to the cat. Now, I could be talked out of that, because if it's a choice of having a cat in a shelter or being killed or being in your house but not being able to, that's probably better. But to me, it would be just too sad. So I need to have a place that's safe, and that the cat can essentially come and go as they please. Although we have 4 cats, and 3 we don't let them come in when they want. Pumpkin does, because he's the boss. And he separated himself from the other 3. And then we felt like he just wanted to be inside. So he comes and goes as he pleases. The other come in sometimes. He doesn't like that. So that was part of it. Then we have the resources and the time to feed them a raw meat diet. And so if I didn't, I just wouldn't like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So every day, twice a day, we fix them food. It's not like cooking it. And there's actually a place that you can buy, like grass-fed, like, beef with organs and bones in a roll, so you can freeze it and just sort of thaw it. They even sell like whole ground up rabbits, and Pumpkin loves those rabbits. So that would, and we didn't do any kind of vet thing, no shots and all that. And so if I had that, then comes to the final question for everybody, especially with cats, which is, if you have 2 cats, one a male and one a female, you will get more cats. And then you'll get more cats.
Mhm.
And then next thing you know, you'll have 50 cats that are kind of inbred and not so healthy.
Mhm.
And I didn't think of that before. And so Pumpkin and Fluffy who are brother and sister, have had 10 cats. And 8 of them we gave away. And 2 of them, Pumpkin Jr. and Lucy, we kept. But we don't want them to have children. And so we had to have them all fixed.
Mhm.
And that was one of the most painful experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
It is, they've never been anywhere but here, in the barn, in the house, or wherever they go. And to put them in a cage and take them to the vet and have them have anesthesia and then bring them home was just excruciating. Now, that we're behind all that, and so they all seem fine, but that's something else I would think about. And if you're going to do that without doing that, like, it's likely the male cat will run off
Mm.
and the female cat will just cry and cry and cry for you to let them out and get pregnant.
Mhm.
And so that became a real problem. And I am the last one that wants to get animals fixed. And then I felt they're my responsibility now.
Yeah.
Because I did that to them. And they didn't ask me to do that. And I'd be pissed if I was them. And they don't seem to be. So given that you have the place, you have the emotional structure and the physical structure, they can go outside, you can give them the best food, and you're willing to get them fixed. And I could be talked out of that, but I could see where this is going, and I didn't like it.
Okay.
It's that tension between nature and nurture that's always lurking behind in the shadows.
Yeah, I mean, their nature is to go out and have babies.
Yeah.
And it's kind of incompatible with what we're, because we just can't have 50 cats in the barn. It's just, and they're also not healthy so much
Right.
once they're so inbred.
Right.
Okay. Food for thought. Tom, last time we had you on, we asked you what your non-negotiables were in your daily habits that you do to tend to your terrain. And you said that you talk to your angels. So I'm curious to know, if you're willing to share, what have your angels been telling you lately? What direction are you pointed based on those conversations?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's just negotiating. I mean, I don't seem to have much choice but to say what I think as clearly as I can. It's like I joke, I tried to do it some other way and, hedge my bets and all. And I just get so confused, I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. So I don't do that. But, I'm not necessarily trying to antagonize everybody I meet. A little bit, but, so I try to walk that line. And that I spend some effort trying to figure out where that line is and how to do it. But I also think we need more people to get this and stand up and start asking people and holding people to the feet to the fire. And because it's not just going to happen from me and Andy and a few other people.
Understood and message received. Tom, we appreciate you coming on, walking that line.
Okay, guys.
And yeah, we will be in touch.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay. Welcome to the after party in the Pineal Room.
Welcome, Doctor.
Welcome, welcome, Dr. Miranda. Well, as they say, we have our marching orders.
Yeah. Time
Uh,
to time
Yep.
to time to put our big boy pants on.
Well, and I think that probably both of us have had that thought, right? That sometimes these podcasts just become echo chambers, and you've made that joke, accurate observation that really these podcasts are just interviewing other podcast hosts,
Right.
and it can feel like that sometimes. And while there's obviously value in having folks on in these health spaces who are focusing on interesting topics that we want to share with the audience, if the pseudoscience that is virology, and as Tom's exposing, even biology and neurology, if these things continue to exist and dominate the world, we get nowhere. And so there is obvious like value and need in bringing some of these other folks on, and doing so in a more public thing like this podcast, or even on a live Zoom or a live YouTube or whatever, and pushing them, like as he said, holding their feet to the fire.
Yeah, to do so in a non-contentious, combative way is the trick, right? Like to do so with respect.
Sure.
I mean, I remember Pete Seeger saying how important it was to have conversations with people you don't agree with, and I always neatly packaged that through the political lens of left versus right. But there's here we are again with nuance. But I think that's one of our strengths as podcast hosts is we tend to we're not in it for the bravado, really. I mean,
Well, speak for yourself.
but
I got a degree out of this.
But would a Ryan Cole even come on a podcast called Terrain Theory, or
Sure.
a Judy Mikovits, or
Yeah.
Robert Malone? It's a great question.
It is. Well, and what we've seen examples of folks who have been labeled the gatekeepers, like Del Bigtree.
Yep.
Asked, why don't you even discuss no virus as an option? And he flatly said, like, the audience isn't ready. I've seen criticism levied against germ warfare, whose podcast we both have devoured in the past, because he had, I think it was Catherine Austin Fitz, but also RFK Jr. on, and just let them go off on biolabs and man-made viruses without pushing back at all on that. And this after having countless guests on talking about no virus. Is it his role and responsibility to adopt a no virus perspective, and hold all of his guests' feet to the fire and question them on everything? I would say no. I don't think that's ever been really how he comports himself as a podcast host. But that said, okay, then he's not going to be the guy necessary to do that. Dell's not going to be the guy necessarily to do that. So who does that leave? And as Tom said, it can't just be him and Andy doing it all the time.
Right. No, it's acolytes. Passing. There's something very real about links in the chain and passing of the torch, and
sure,
that's how any good idea. I mean, that's again, Quinn, one mind at a time.
Yeah,
it's the passing of the baton. It's at some level. Like they've sort of done their due diligence. They continue to. It's not like they're stopping, but it can't only be them. That's right.
Yeah, correct. And to the listener, I think I should have clarified when I mentioned to Tom that there was a template out there for such a conversation, and I cited Andy and Judy. That would be Andy Kaufman and Judy Mikovits, who were both brought on to a different podcast to have a conversation specifically around this no virus thing. And that's out there. I think it might be on YouTube or it might be on BitChute. You could probably look it up. And it was just an interesting unfolding. And eventually they came to loggerheads. They just couldn't agree. But what I liked about that conversation was that Andy simply stated again and again and again, like, show me the study, show me the study that demonstrates this in this way using this method, and I will gladly recant or revise my stance. and in that conversation, at least that couldn't happen. I don't know if behind the scenes Judy was able to send him anything. I just don't know. But anyway, that is one way that it has I've seen unfold, and it can be uncomfortable. It's certainly I think it was a little bit uncomfortable for that podcast host because to get animated. At least Judy got really animated, and anyway.
Yeah, what question I still have, Ben, and I wanted to ask Tom, but I also just like Tom just holding court and going where he's going to go because it's always fascinating. But I wonder. Okay, what I got some clarity on this idea, and I've been sitting with this for a while and getting more and more comfortable. What is a cell, right? And like this idea that he brought up the example of like the tissue of a liver, for example, that it's tissue, and then around the outskirts you find cells. And I guess in the past I thought, well, like a cell is a way the body sequesters and eliminates toxins, but it's becoming more and more clear that it's actually the way. That's what they do. That's why they're there. It's not just like one of the things they do. This is toxin removal service. This is waste management. And so that's all fine and good. And then your body makes mucus, which I guess is like the exporting of cellular debris. But where do those toxins go? Is my question. Are they neutralized by the body? Are they put into the stool and then they end up in your septic tank? They certainly must exist in the world, and that's that's why the more toxins we create, the more plastic we create. They're not going anywhere. You're just getting them out of your body. But where do they go? They must be somewhere.
Yeah, well, exhalation or blowing your nose, coughing, and like you said, the stool. I'm not, and I haven't. I'm a doctor, Michael, but not necessarily in cell biology. So it's these are worthwhile questions. I think would have been great to ask Tom, but you don't have all the time in the world.
Exactly. We got to pick our battles, and we'll have him back, and maybe I'll even shoot him an email and just ask that very specific question.
But I think that I think it's a very important question because it's all wrapped up in what really makes us ill. How do we define? These are not diseases. Perhaps you might even not say it's illnesses. These are just symptoms of the body detoxifying. So, like as you said, one of the main functions of the body in order to constantly achieve this like homeostasis or balance is removal of toxins and waste materials. Like this is fundamental. And what we think of symptoms of disease is actually just the body continually detoxifying. It is like, it cannot be overstated, can it? Like the need to optimize the body to understand this process of detoxification, to identify the exposure, what are the toxins, and then 3, like what are the symptoms? What does that look like? How do we optimize the body for this essential process?
Yeah. Do you ever hear that? What would I call it? Sort of like this urban myth, I guess. I remember growing up with this idea that because your body is always under this is maybe an old paradigm too, but like your body's always creating new quote unquote cells, and your old cells are like, they say like millions of your skin cells are just sort of flying off you every day, right? This like constant regeneration process. And I remember someone putting this idea in my head that every 7 years, and I actually think this is nonsense because I think the process works maybe a lot quicker than this in reality. But every 7 years, you're a new creature because it takes 7 years for your system to like completely replace all the old quote unquote cells. And I think that is something I've always sort of grown up. I remember turning like whatever multiple of 7.
I'm thinking like I'm the 4th iteration of myself.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think it's a little. I don't think it's that sort of blockish like that. I think that every day we're out with the old, in with the new. It's ongoing. I like thinking about like what Sam and Mark Bailey said about like the dry brush and just like helping your skin move those dead cells along, and all these little things to out with the old, in with the new. It's beautiful.
Did you purchase a dry brush?
I love my dry brush.
Dude,
Yeah.
I love mine too. How often do you dry brush?
I forget more often than not, right? It sort of like hangs in my shower and I don't know. Sometimes I just like you turn like all these years of muscle memory, you turn the shower on and you get in and like, oh, there's a step I should be doing
Mhm.
beforehand. So I forget often. But I don't know. Once every 2 weeks, it seems like, and it always feels really good.
It feels really good, doesn't it? It's exactly how Sam described it. Like you feel vibrant. Your skin feels like alive,
Yeah.
glowing. Yeah, it's a cool feeling. That was an awesome little habit to stack.
Yeah, I like that
Um,
one.
I really I loved that Tom started with how do we define like that line between life and death. Like
Yeah.
what is life and how do we know when something is dead? There is a book series called Investigate with Nate. It's a children's book.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a group of 4 kids who go to a museum before it opens. It opens at 10 o'clock. They go at 9, and there's a scientist in there named Nate who takes them through this like magic world where they can become like a raindrop and understand the water cycle. And there's one of the books that's called The Life Cycle. So so they go to this little magical world to better understand what life is. And one of the first pages of that is like, we don't really know how to define when something is alive or dead. Like if you take a flower and you cut it and you put it into water, like that thing will still express as if it was alive. It can still like, bloom and act as if it's alive, but you've just cut it off. Is it alive? Is it dead?
Mm.
And there's a number of, I mean, and this book does talk about viruses too, and says like, well, viruses technically aren't alive.
Hmm.
You're always going to encounter, I think, germs
Mm-hmm.
and viruses in some of these like sciencey books for kids. But it's fascinating. That was the first thing that came to my mind is like, oh yeah, we still don't even have that answered properly. Like if that foundation is not in place, where do you even go from there? And
It's a
I
great
also,
foundational question. Yeah, go on.
yeah, it's a great foundational question. And there's this conversation around the use of animals, and particularly like killing an animal to better understand life.
Yeah.
And and it was a new side or new side to Tom that I was not aware of. And I have so much respect for that. And this notion of sadism. And if you recall, and I think I've spoken about this in after parties, but when I was home from college summer break, there were 2 summers where I worked at the University of New Hampshire psychology department
Right.
up on like the 3rd floor where they were doing experiments on rats, and they were testing rats like exposures to things like cocaine and running them through all the tests that they do.
Yeah.
And then they would sacrifice the rat and then cut it open and examine the brain. And like I was in I was in that environment, and I remember feeling so dirty, like handling these baby rats so that they would be used to an adult human handling them as they got older, and then understanding that their life was just going to be living in cages, subject to these like science experiments. And it felt like this is it. Like this is how we learn about life, is putting these animals through like torture. And to hear like Tom uh, feels like he is of that same mindset. Like this is not the way forward. This is not how science should be conducted. This is not how we should come to better understandings of life, is to sacrifice animals and make their life anything less than like beautiful and optimized.
Yeah. And yet there's still that tension between that awareness and sentiment versus like, yeah, I feed my cat ground up rabbits.
Right.
And so
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
is it the
Yeah.
intention? Is it the sourcing?
Mm,
That rabbit
mm.
had a beautiful, wonderful life hopping around until it was ground up.
Yeah.
There's a tension there. There's a
There is.
tension in the ancestral diet that Tom espouses
Yeah. No,
as an
it's
animal
true.
lover, right?
As an animal lover, yeah, no, that's correct. I mean, I suppose you'd have to just start diving really deep on the sourcing of every aspect of all
Yep.
food that gets served to one's family and one's animals. Yeah, that even that question about like domestication of an animal. that they're at odds, right? The nature,
Right.
the inclination of that animal is to be free and to roam and to procreate. And in order to, quote unquote, properly domesticate, like be a cat owner, one is almost required to spay and neuter, unless one wants to be dealing with kittens endlessly and the potential for, very unhealthy litters because of incest.
Right.
And now, I wanted to have like a lighter question at the end, and now
I know.
I will lose sleep
It's so
tonight.
funny. It seems
going
like
to-
such a softball.
Yeah, it's like, and now I'm like, oh man, maybe I am not ready to have a cat. But again, it's like, it comes back to like the respect for the man, the growing respect for the man, to recall that trip to the vet to have his cats fixed as, an awful moment. That's just respect for life, isn't it? It's just respect for life. It's for feeling this obligation and responsibility, and overarchingly like wanting to provide the best life possible to this thing that is under your care.
Yeah. There's, as a pet owner, there's an element of playing God, because you're creating an environment that is not a natural ecology for a cat. It's not. It's not artificial. I mean, we have house cats. I love our cats so much. And as a touring musician, I thought we'll never have cats. And then even when the kids were young, yeah, we'll never have cats. And then so one of the byproducts of lockdown is that now we have cats, and they're so wonderful. But they're house cats. And my son has a lot of anxiety about them getting out. It's like he locks our doors at night, not because of fear of intruders, because he's afraid the cats will figure out how to how to get outside.
Yeah.
I mean, he's really taken it to a level, and it just pains me. And it's funny, sometimes they do get out, and I always feel sort of secretly thrilled for them. And it's happened twice, and we've been able to round them up. And but yeah, it just seems so. It doesn't seem so. It's so very unnatural to keep an animal from contacting nature for its entire life.
Right. Well, I do know that. Well, it seems like a when, not an if, because I've already told Grayson we're getting a cat, and I've thought a lot about it. I loved cats growing up. We had a cat that didn't end as well as I would have liked it to.
Mm-hmm.
That's a separate story.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe another session for the emotion code woman. Poor Woody. Woody's demise.
Woody, huh?
Woody,
that's cute.
yeah. I've already decided that I will not declaw that cat. I don't care what that cat does to the indoor furniture or space. I'll give it whatever it can to scratch on other than the couch, but I'm not going to declaw a cat. We declawed Woody. It felt like this is not right. That feels sadistic. The cat's health should come before like the health of a piece of furniture, certainly. And then I've decided I do want it to be indoor outdoor. I do want it to experience the outdoor. So however I can achieve that without the cat being put in danger because of other predators or running away, as Tom said, I'm going to try to achieve that, which is why I asked if Pumpkin, his cat, does consultations on how to do it. Tongue in cheek, but I know he respects and reveres that cat, Pumpkin, the boss.
Yeah, there was some deep wisdom there at the end. I was glad to hear it.
Deep wisdom. I had to say, when he was talking about the example of hammering in a nail, how do we know like it wasn't the hand that does it? When he did say, how do you know it's not thinking about hammering in the nail? It being May 3rd and tomorrow being May the 4th, an important Star Wars day. And Grayson, now the 6-year-old, having been exposed to the original trilogy of Star Wars, I couldn't help but think about the Force, perhaps nailing that nail in and not the hammer.
Is Grayson all in on Star Wars right now? How's that going?
Listen, I think I will look back at fatherhood as he becomes an adult and leaves the house and goes off into the world. I will probably look back and wonder at a lot of the decisions I've made, how I've raised this child, and what I've allowed him to be exposed to at certain ages. One would be perhaps like music that has swear words in it. He now has his lexicon includes every swear word. When he stubs his toe, I mean, it's like hearing some dude at a Southie just go off. It's funny. It's funny, but it's also like, what have I done?
Yes.
And Star Wars, exposing him to Star Wars, he'd been hearing about the characters at school, so I was like, let's just do it. The problem is just that he now dresses up as Darth Vader.
Oh,
And he
that's
wants
interesting.
to be Darth Vader, and he'll say, "Luke, I am your father," and then it's not the character that you necessarily want your 6-year-old to be embracing or
I
identifying with.
know. I have friends and family who really fucking love the dark side characters, and I'm like respect, you be you, free will, love who you love, but it's like how can you want to dress up as the dark side characters? It just
I,
it actually like tortures me a little bit.
Yes. So I don't think it's because Grayson has the dark side in him. I want to believe that. I'm his father. This is not an objective observation.
Yeah.
Although I think it's because he's so unusual a character. First of all, this is like the second movie he's ever watched. So it's a very extraordinary character to see this person in a black cape who talks differently, who has this breathing thing. And then he always comes back to, it's funny when he talks about it, he always comes back to the scene in Return of the Jedi where Darth just rediscovers the good in him.
Yeah.
So I think that, luckily, I think that kernel sits with Grayson, that, this was a character who redeemed himself and saved his son. So I think maybe there's a little bit, hopefully I'm hoping that he identifies with that aspect, the redemption story of Darth Vader, and not just going to like wantonly choke generals because they disagree with me using the Force or all the other crap.
Exactly.
But anyway, I, side note, I had to work in some Star Wars nerdism in there.
Yeah, good. It's all good. So it's a day in the life.
Yeah, day in the life. The truth is never scary. It can be painful, but it's never scary. That's one I'm going to sit with.
Yeah, I like that too. I wrote that down.
The truth is never scary. And as he said, the truth is that we need to get some folks on here. We need to get some virologists on here, hold some feet to the fire. I wonder though, Mike, you said that the key, the trick, that line is like how to do so in a respectful, non-confrontational way. And what I wanted to push back on you with is that even possible?
Right.
But it is confrontational by definition. You are confronting them on the foundation of, of their belief system, and their profession, like their very existence in the world.
Yeah.
It is confrontational, I guess. Yeah. And like you said, it's just the way that you do it, I suppose. Right.
You know what? I can't help but think, and it's not like we're a big podcast like Joe Rogan or something, but
getting there,
doing this, I feel like a conversation like that is best had in person.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's just something so sterile about the remote conversation, especially amongst strangers, for lack of, we don't know these people at any personal level, you know? So it's like I feel like when you're sitting in the room with somebody, you feel a different resonance and maybe a different level of human respect, like being to being, that is absent, especially since these people, ourselves included, are really these people, these like figures in the space, they're like inundated with interview after interview after interview. It's just like a lot of Zoom windows, a lot of screens, and there's something inherently impersonal about that, literally impersonal about that.
I guess my only question then is your place or mine?
Yeah, exactly. Or a neutral location, right?
Neutral location.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't know what I mean. You know what's funny though, since we're talking about it, I remember, because you and I have followed a lot of these people. Like, I remember when McCullough sort of like first hit the scene, and we were definitely listening to some of his early interviews and his experience, calling out the danger of the injections in particular. But I remember a lot of these doctors, you hear this talking point. It's like, I'm not anti-vax, but I am concerned about this shot. And I remember McCullough saying, like, I just had a flu shot yesterday. And, and this is me speculating, but when I was listening to him do an interview, say 2 weeks later or a month later, he was sick. He was sick. And, you can't help but connect the dots. Like, okay, you had a flu shot. a couple weeks later, now you're sick. Yeah, it's just sometimes it writes itself.
Doc, it hurts when I do this.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's where it has to go. It has to be the army needs to grow. You know what I mean? And so it's less, I guess when that happens, it's less and less of a fringe thing. It's just like he said, you guys need to be able to have that conversation. You guys need to be able to have that debate. And I don't think he means you guys necessarily as podcast hosts, although we are uniquely positioned to start having those conversations. But I think when I took that class with him, he was saying the same thing. You guys around this table, it's not like everyone around that table had a podcast. It's just as people with thinking minds and mouths and ears.
Yeah.
You guys need to start having these conversations.
Yeah. Agreed. No, agreed. Acolytes.
Yeah. Acolytes. Exactly.
I think the other point that I really resonated with me was in the medical profession, how you're never to blame the patient.
Oof.
That seems like such a profound misstep.
Talk about a foundational misstep, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it flies in the face of essentially our mission statement, accountability, agency, awareness.
Well, yeah. When you, if you come in with a broken arm, isn't the first question, what did you do? Like, wouldn't that be the first question? What did you do?
Right.
Right? It's your actions have consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was validating. Of course it was validating. And I sort of led him down that right, agency and accountability. But these are the cornerstones, like the pillars, I suppose, of what we're trying to get at.
Absolutely. And I've listened to Tom a lot in the last couple of years, as have you, I know. And I like that he circles back. I've heard him say the frog thing, and I've heard him talk about the hammer thing, but it's like in a sense, it's like you can't say it enough. It's just you have to come back to the foundational thinking. But what you started this conversation off with, this after party, is this whole idea of a living thing and a dead thing. And I do think that does seem to be a great gateway into discussing these ideas with people who aren't on board yet, because it's pretty self-evident that there's a wild discrepancy, not discrepancy, but like living versus dead. Let's just start there. And so if what we're doing in laboratories is poking dead things and then trying to equate that to how a living system works right out of the gate, we're we're wildly off the trail. It's pretty actually obvious when you view it through that lens. I never viewed it through that lens until recently. Laboratories are essentially morgues.
Did you dissect a frog in high school?
I know that we dissected a cow's eyeball.
Okay.
And I don't remember if we did a frog.
I don't recall ever dissecting an animal. And we may have done it and I just blocked it out.
Yeah. I feel like that might be true for me too, because we went essentially to the same school.
Not essentially. We did go to the same school.
Right. Well, like what age do you start doing that? I feel like I remember doing the eyeball, I want to say in middle school. Like, so that's like 6, 7, 8, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The frog. Yeah, I think I blocked it out too. It's funny. Now that we're talking about it, I have this like sense memory of like the formaldehyde smell sort of coming. Yeah.
But I don't have specific memory of, taking a scalpel and exploring the organs.
Right. Yeah.
Ugh. We have such a ways to go as a species.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty dark.
Yeah,
New paradigms are messy as fuck. They say it all the time. It's all fine and good to say it like as a punk rocker, but like when the rubber meets the road, shit's getting real.
Shit's getting real. Well, I got to tell you, I was checking out the new biology clinic. This would be this new endeavor that Tom has been instrumental in pioneering. As he said, he's not actually seeing patients, but the main doctor mentored under Tom, and it's incredibly reasonable. The membership is like $60 a month or something, and you get unlimited private consultations and a whole bunch of other stuff included. It seems just like incredibly too good to be true doable for a person. So I'm actually considering just becoming a member just so I can dive right in and see what can be unearthed through these processes of telling my story to someone
Yeah.
who's got a good methodology for asking the right questions.
Yeah, even I mean that's great to know. Thanks for looking into that. Even if you do it for 3 months or 6 months and just lay some groundwork,
Yeah.
it seems like money really well spent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and put that up against the urgent care visit. I think I talked about on
Right,
past
right, right.
episodes that we took Grayson to. We got the bill for that. He had gone to 2 in 1 week, and the bill from them is like, insurance says you owe this much for each. It's like $261 for
Yeah.
each visit,
Yeah.
and he didn't have any. Like, there were no tests done. It was literally just sitting there for 15 minutes, maybe, telling someone what's wrong with them and having them tell you to go take like medication. $261 for that.
I know. I mean, so much of it is uh coming up in this broken system where that's still like our first instinct when shit goes off the rails. Like, okay, I guess we got to go to urgent care. Like just
Yeah.
yesterday though, to take it out of the health realm, it's like we had no hot. We were hosting a recording session here this weekend and we lost hot water. It's like, wouldn't you know? It's like we've got people from out of town here and uh they're paying to be here. We have no hot water. It's like you got a deal, right? And I'm like, it's like, I should fucking be able to figure this out. It's like
Mm,
in the past, I feel like, well, I'm a musician. I don't know how boilers work. Like, no, figure out how boilers work. Or like, and
yeah.
so when push came to shove, yes, we had to call a plumber in, and it was an insane amount of money. But at least now my outlook on life is like, I'm going to shadow this guy and I'm going to watch what he
Oh,
does and I'm going to learn how it works. Like that was never interesting to me before. I couldn't be bothered. But so like accountability and awareness can transcend your good health habits. Just like I should know how my home makes hot water, and
yeah.
when it goes awry, because I could have saved myself hundreds of dollars. Yeah,
Yeah. I agree. No, when these Vigo raised bed gardens come, I should probably put them together, but I'm going to have you drive up to put them together for free. I might pay your gas and I might feed you a little bit,
well,
but
that's just silliness. That's just silliness. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, no,
Are you
I hear
excited
everything.
about putting your garden in? Yeah.
I'm very excited. Yeah, I'm very excited. I don't know if raised beds is the way to go long term, but it's what I'm doing now. I mean, my house was built on ledge, so I think a lot of the yard is ledge. We've got the little like
Yep.
stones, so I don't know how feasible it would be to like till the ground. So I'm just going to go raised beds for now.
It's a great way to start.
Yeah, 4 raised beds, and like I've said, we've got the raspberry bushes,
Mhm.
blueberry bushes, blackberry bushes all over. I'll get that from it, and then just start to piece this thing together as I go. I'm trying to remind myself that it doesn't all have to happen
No.
in year one. I mean, I've been here for like 3 months, and I
Yep.
sometimes will lie awake being like, I gotta do this. It's springtime, as Mikey would say. It's go time,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I haven't done anything. But the raised beds are on the way, and it'll all get done as it gets done. And
That's it. It's funny you were mentioning the book you were reading to Grace, and last night I was reading to Opal this really sweet book that I think her grandmother brought over. It's essentially a beginner's guide to gardening told as a comic book,
huh,
right? And so it's like it's good. It's good. It had some nice foundational concepts, but one of which is just start small, like just and only do as much as you can handle and like I've said on our little homestead, like every year I'll do a little bit more. Yesterday I had a great day. My neighbor happens to be a master gardener. She's a long walk through the woods and a short drive, and she pinged me. She has a sweet little greenhouse, just like a little nothing crazy, just like some plastic over some cattle panel, but it's very well organized and um, she does seed starts and she donates a lot of them to a community garden in Kingston. And
mm,
but she wrote to me, "Do you want any?" I was like, I always say yes. And so, but I'm behind as well. I guess is my way of saying if she didn't text me and say, "Do you want some starts?" It's not even because we were on tour for the first half of April. Like I'm a little behind as well. But I tell you what. And we had a lot of rain here the last week, like a lot of rain. But it was sunny yesterday morning, and I came back with some broccoli and broccoli rabe and parsley and peas and kale and some little berry runners, and I, took my shirt off. And actually, no, it's funny. I didn't take my shirt off. I took my shoes off. I was wearing my white terrain theory shirt, and I'm like, it's really a mistake to be gardening in a white shirt, but I did it, and I kept it clean. And to get my hands in the dirt, in the sunshine, putting little fresh shoots for a new season, was such good medicine. Like I knew it would be, but I thought of you. I was like, I can't wait to tell Ben about this, because the soil in the earth was sort of like clay-like and not great. That's where I put the berry runners, although it has good sun, but I need to do some soil amendment there. But in my raised beds, which you just purchased, the soil was so beautiful, and that really made me feel good to see that it wasn't worse than it was last year. It was actually better. And so here we go.
It's not good medicine, Mike. It's the best medicine, isn't it?
It's the only medicine.
Mm.
Yeah. There's the sum are greater than the parts, or whatever that expression is. Like, just being in the garden, collaborating with nature like that at any scale is really, really magical.
Electron exchange.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah.
Well, folks, nothing you heard here should be taken as medical advice, as neither Mike nor I are medical experts. We are podcast experts. Remember that you are light. You are love. The truth is never scary. And you are your primary healthcare provider. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next one.